All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and I think finally, after a lot of trials and tribulations, I'm actually live streaming, broadcasting to you. Had to abort a couple of previous streams very, very early on because of some tech challenges. I think they're ironed out. I had some other obligations this afternoon that caused me to have to delay this live stream, but I really wanted to get it in today. I didn't want to cancel altogether, and the reason is because right now there is going on a very important primary in a very important state, that is Michigan. I don't know, is it real? It is important, although if you look at the numbers, right, the latest poll, it doesn't look important. Joe Biden up by 70 points. He's going to win easily over the only candidate, I guess, on the ballot who's actually running is Dean Phillips. Marianne Williamson, you see her name there, I think. She doesn't even have a number next to it. It just says Mayor Williamson because she's also running. So it's a no-brainer. And I think this is one of the reasons that I find the chatter, the internet chatter, where, erstwhile progressives and organizations, institutions like the one for which I was previously associated with, Our Revolution, coming out and saying, oh, vote uncommitted, don't vote for Joe Biden in the primary. It's performative to me. It's not meaningful. I understand that the issue underlying the vote uncommitted movement is real, and I subscribe to it 100%. By the way, subscribe to Halitics, and you see the little button there. Please do. I really would love to get 200, 300, 500 subscribers and on. And it's been a slog. It's been harder than I thought it would be perfectly honest with you, to get bigger numbers, but I live in hope. So, Biden's going to win this primary, and Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee unless something happens that's unexpected, not completely given his age, given that there's some issues he's facing. Who knows? Maybe he'll, decide it's not worth it. His deteriorating mental condition, to the extent it is deteriorating. I think it is. I don't think there's any doubt that may cause him or cause his doctors to prevail upon him to decide to withdraw. Maybe he has a heart-to-heart moment with Kamala Harris and they come to some agreement that she is ready indeed to take the reins of the Democratic Party. But let's face it, that's all very unlikely. He's going to be the nominee, and there's some very significant reasons to be worried about that beyond his age and the ever-growing number of senior moments that we seem to have observed. His policies are very, very problematic. Most importantly, most significantly at this time, in the Middle East, where we are watching terrifyingly a genocide, or at least a succession of genocidal acts by Israel against the people of Gaza. And it's incredibly upsetting. It's incredibly painful, and yet it's happening, and there's nothing we can, there's no point in trying to pretend it isn't. And this is going to hurt Joe Biden in the general election in Michigan. That's why I put up for today's program, will Michigan be Biden's Waterloo? And you can see the Biden head on, I don't know if it's how clear it is, but I was hoping it would be somewhat clear, the Biden head on Napoleon's body, of course, where Napoleon fell, at the end was at Waterloo. First, the forced retreat from Moscow, which devastated his army, but he was able to recover, come back from, I guess it was Elba, or maybe it was St. Helena. I don't know which one he went to first. I think it was Elba. He was exiled. He came back, reconstituted the French army, and then they lost at Waterloo, one of his few losses in battle. And so my question is, will Michigan be possibly equal to or not equal to to Biden's Waterloo? It won't be tonight. I guarantee you that. Biden's going to win handily, easily, by big numbers. And that's why I'll be honest with you, the efforts by some progressives to seemingly distance themselves from Joe Biden and, my old boss at Our Revolution, Joseph Guy Varghese, has, and I sent him an email. I was hoping to get him on my show today. I was thinking, well, maybe we worked together for 4 years. Maybe that would be, something that would cause him to think, well, I'll do Hal a solid. I'll come on his live stream. But I guess Joseph's too busy for that. I really don't know. I know I tried to get some OR rep when I couldn't get Joseph Guy Verghese, and that was not availing. Very disappointed. This was published yesterday in USA Today. Wake up, Mr. President. Your support for Israel over Gaza may well cost you the election. I think that's possible. I don't think it's so likely, but the impetus for this op-ed and others is, of course, the Michigan primary, where a significant percentage, probably the highest percentage of Arab American voters reside. And they have made it clear that because of the unswerving support, unwavering support that Joe Biden offers Israel as it annihilates Palestinians, they can't, that is the Palestinian American, the Arab American, the Muslim voters in Michigan, despite the fact that they're overwhelmingly Democratic, are just simply not prepared to offer Joe Biden the kind of support he's received from them in the past. And that could spell significant trouble, obviously, in a very, very close state that's on knife's edge in November. It's not going to matter tomorrow. And I think these kinds of columns, and we'll hear from some other commentators, pundits in a moment, to me, they're kind of controlled opposition. In other words, the Democratic Party elites are saying to progressives who are complaining, whining, saying, you got to stop this, President Biden, you got to, somehow use your leverage on Bibi to end the indiscriminate killing in Gaza. And the Democratic leadership, the James Carvilles, I don't know if he's really a leader anymore, but the people behind the scenes, the media elites and the like, are saying, you got to back Joe Biden. He's your guy. Doesn't matter what he does. Trump. But here's your opportunity we're going to give you. Go ahead, criticize Biden right now. Tell him that he's too old. Tell him that he's got to, or tell him, say that he can't keep supporting Michigan. It'll look like there's a little bit of independence. It'll look like there are actually more than one, there's more than just the corporate militarist wing of the Democratic Party that has some influence. And who knows, maybe we will get a ceasefire. It'll look like the progressives got something. So it's really just controlled opposition as I see it. And so I kind of am like, well, you're not doing anything for me. You're really not. You're really not fighting for peace, our revolution. You're really not fighting for peace, Crystal Ball, and we'll hear from her in a moment. I saw this, they're saying here, this was a tweet from, again, Joseph Guy, and I tried to get him on. I also tried to get on Paco Fabian, who is the Our Revolution spokesperson, and he was unavailable as well, although he certainly sent me. And I have, warm feelings towards these folks. It's not like I'm angry at them or anything, but I would have loved if they would have come on and talked to me about the strategy that Our Revolution is pursuing with respect to the election in the fall. Here's the tweet. Our Revolution is urging Democrats to listen to Michigan and vote uncommitted because Biden's failure to stop Bibi's brutal massacre in Gaza could well cost him the election and give us Trump. And there's an agreement. This would be the worst possible outcome. At least that's the agreement on the kind of controlled left, the controlled opposition left, the progressive Democratic left, the progressive centrist left, whatever you want to call them. There's only so far they're prepared to go, which is Biden's old, Biden's somewhat demented, Biden's support for Israel could cost him the election. But in the end, ultimately, we all have to rally around the flag, boys, and support Joe Biden. I mean, I'm not there. I'm like, well, Biden's really bad. I mean, he's bad. Trump's bad. I don't feel that, the difference is so tremendous that I feel any kind of real obligation to support Biden at this point, because it's just that bad what he's doing, not just in Gaza by supporting without unflinchingly Netanyahu, but also his aggressive push to keep the killing going in Ukraine, his failure, in my view, to truly stand with workers, his promoting the climate holocaust by making us again, or by setting a new record when it comes to U.S. production of oil and gas. So for all those reasons, Biden's almost as bad, if not as bad, as Trump. And I know that gets folks really, really upset when I say that, but that's how I see it. If you disagree, you're welcome, of course, to call in and tell me why I'm wrong. 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. Again, please please subscribe. I thought one of my big beefs, honestly, with that vote uncommitted is that Guy Verghese, but the whole movement, right? Guy Verghese for Our Revolution, but the whole vote uncommitted movement isn't choosing an alternative, someone who could be, a good president, someone who would really fight for poor, struggling, and working people and fight for peace. And I was like, well, isn't there someone else they can support? Because it seems to me it's really it's weak tea. It's meaningless. You're saying vote uncommitted, but you're not saying vote for this person instead of Biden. So I saw that name Williamson. I thought, well, maybe what about Marianne Williamson? Of course, it occurred to me very quickly. She's not actively campaigning. She's withdrawn. She did call for a ceasefire, unlike Biden. So if your issue is first and foremost, we've got to bring back the Arab American, the Muslim American, the Palestinian American voters in Michigan to the Democratic fold so we can defeat Trump. If that's what you care first and foremost about, and the way you want to bring those voters back is by at least not standing so closely, so tightly with Israel, it would seem to me you have an alternative, not a great alternative, or you had an alternative in Marianne Williamson. You don't in Dean Phillips. I was watching a video Dean Phillips did with, I believe it was Breonna Joy. Maybe it wasn't Breonna Joy Gray. It was with someone on CNN, and he just simply would not say, yes, right now we need a ceasefire. He kept talking about, yes, a ceasefire, but also release the hostages. He couldn't just say, we need a ceasefire right now. And if you cared about the hostages, you support a ceasefire. Dean Phillips wouldn't say that. So he's not an option. Marianne Williamson's not an option because she's not running. Although, if you really were concerned about a ceasefire, and I don't like Marianne Williamson, I don't endorse Marianne Williamson, maybe you say vote for Marianne Williamson over Biden in the Democratic primary in Michigan. She's not an option. So I get the vote uncommitted. There's no better choice. Maybe what you should do is simply not vote in the Democratic Party at all, or vote in the Green Party if there's a Green Party primary. I don't believe there is, so that's not an option either. So really, either you sit out the Democratic primary or you vote uncommitted. I guess this seems like a viable strategy, a reasonable strategy. Ultimately, I don't view it as meaningful because this is not going to hurt Joe Biden. I don't believe. Now, and the reason I say it's not going to hurt him is because I don't think more than 2 or 3% are going to vote uncommitted. We saw Biden win New Hampshire. He wasn't even on the ballot in New Hampshire, and he won over Marianne Williamson. He won over Dean Phillips. I think Phillips got second. Is that right? So Biden won a state he wasn't even on the ballot. And not one, I guess it's one of his stronger states. It's a state Bernie won easily in 2020 and easily in 2016. So I think we see that among the Democratic primary electorate, Joe Biden has very little to fear. That doesn't mean he's going to win. I'm saying among the Democratic primary voters who have shown themselves over and over to be relatively conservative, corporate. Right? I mean, the Democratic primary voters ultimately chose Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders in 2016, one of the worst, most indefensible election votes I've ever seen. Worse, in my view, less arguably defensible than the vote for Trump over Hillary. Remember, Trump came out against the disastrous Iraq war while Hillary was shilling for it, calling for it, supporting it. And she only ultimately 10 years after Trump came out against it, said it was wrong because she was under tremendous pressure to do so. Hillary was a big supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, only came out against it because Trump was aggressively against it, as was Bernie, and it was hurting her in the polls. Hillary was not clearly, obviously, in every area, or even in most areas, superior to Trump, and not in the most important areas either. Bernie was very obviously superior to Hillary in virtually every area in 2016. So the decision to vote for Hillary by the Democratic primary voters over Bernie was unconscionable. It was utterly wrong. I'm saying that to point out to you that Democratic primary voters are not to be trusted, are not to be relied upon, are not to be viewed as a hallmark or harbinger of future election results. Remember, they voted for the loser in 2016 over the man, Bernie Sanders, who very likely would have beaten Trump and certainly would have been a much better president than either Trump or Clinton. The Democratic primary voters in Michigan, even if 2-3% sit it out, vote uncommitted, they're going to overwhelmingly support Joe Biden. He's going to be the Democratic nominee. Will he win? Could Michigan ultimately fall down for him? And it's possible. It really is, but you won't learn anything about the primary. Now, I looked at the hand wringing and the fretting about Palestine and how it could hurt Biden in the general election. I wish it would. I wish that right now Joe Biden had tremendous fear. I wish all of his advisors were looking at every poll and saying, your support, Joe, for Israel, your failure, your refusal to break with Israel, your refusal to demand a ceasefire, your refusal to call publicly for an end to all, at a minimum, military assistance for Israel is costing you. You have to change. I wish that were the case, because I think that's the only thing that might actually cause him to change course, to change policy. Tragically, I don't think it's having, it is having that big an effect. I don't think our support for Israel appears, at least when it comes to polling, to be that harmful to Joe Biden. I'm just going to adjust my mic a little bit. You may hear some noise. Probably shouldn't be too bad. All right, so there it is. There's the results. And you can see, okay, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 polls of Michigan going back to October. And it doesn't look good for Joe Biden, does it? That October poll was just after October 7th, and probably the Israeli genocidal acts weren't really hurting, hadn't really impacted in any way, weren't really in the political calculations of voters at that point. And yet Biden was down by 5. Biden drops to 10 as of the end of October in a CNN poll. So these are credible polls. But if you look, the race has really tightened. And I don't know, maybe these newer polls aren't as good. I always say you should look at the polls that are by reputable pollsters, and certainly the first 3 in terms of chronology, Times, CNN, and I'm going to assume Detroit News. It's in Michigan, right? So they presumably know Michigan, which have Trump above the margin of error. That's got to worry you if you're Biden. Okay, so a month later, the deficit had shrunk significantly. The last 3 polls, Hill Emerson, I think Emerson's a decent poll. I don't know anything about Epic MRA. Fox News is a decent poll. Fox News only has Trump up by 2 within the margin of error. Epic has it at 4, so the margin of error, and then the Hill again back to 2. So it's actually narrowing the deficit between Trump and Biden. If I'm on the Biden team, I'm like, hey, we're not getting hurt by our support for Israel. We're not seeing the numbers drop off precipitously. In fact, it's narrowing. Why is it narrowing in Michigan? Because the economy's getting a little stronger. Because inflation is now apparently under control. Because rental property prices are dropping a little bit. The cost that is to rent is a little bit less than it was relative to people's income. And that by the way, rents are a huge issue in the Detroit area where people don't make that much money, and rents had been rising. Michigan isn't as cheap a state as some of the other Midwestern states to live. So if rents are coming down, at least relative to real income, then that's going to help Biden. Then the economy looks a little better. People aren't voting against him because of the economy. So these polls, I should say, don't suggest that Israel-Gaza is really hurting Trump in Michigan. In fact, I'm sorry, they don't suggest that Israel-Gaza is helping Trump or hurting Biden, which I think is too bad, because I think Biden deserves not to be reelected, if only, and it's not if only in my opinion, there's other factors, but if only because of his full-throated support for Israel and Netanyahu. All right, let's go to breaking points. I mentioned one of the progressive, quote, progressive institutions that I worked for, Our Revolution. Some concerns. I don't really view them as taking that bold a stance against the Democratic establishment when calling for people in Michigan to vote uncommitted. What about breaking points, and specifically their progressive host, Crystal Ball? She does this with Sagar. Where does she come down? And I want to play this because I thought this was very interesting. And again, what I'm saying is there are breaks. See, to me, if you had a real groundswell among influencers who were meaningfully saying, don't support Joe Biden, I think that could be the game changer that would in the end lead to another nominee, Biden withdrawing, maybe it being Kamala Harris, who I'm not a fan of and I don't support any more than I support Joe Biden, but maybe somebody else. Who knows? It's hard to see who it could be. There's not a bench. The Democrats don't have a bench, and it's their own fault, of course, that they don't have one because they didn't have a primary. Really, they did everything possible to prevent primaries. Here's Crystal Ball on the situation in that sort of. I guess they're showing MSNBC. Breaking Points is the bottom right, is the logo, and then they're playing from an MSNBC town hall. So let's see if we can get this going.
Those are not the only issues that Joe Biden has, though. Obviously, there are concerns about his age. There's also concerns about the way that he has destroyed his previous winning coalition out of, absolute fealty and unconditional support for Israel in their assault on the Gaza Strip. John Fetterman, though, unshaken.
Right, so I wanted to stop it. We'll play a little more, but again, you can even see that little caption, Michigan voters angry at Biden, and it goes to some interviews that we're actually going to play a little later in the live stream I want to get to, where they focus more on Israel-Gaza. But I also want to talk about maybe a little bit also Biden and the working class. But it's a misleading headline, right? Because you just saw those polls. And again, just before we get back to that, please subscribe. You see the subscribe button that I put in there, especially for you. I want to see it every show. If I can get one new subscriber per show, I'll be a happy camper. Seems like a pretty small ask, pretty low ask. So if you're already a subscriber, ask your lover, ask your child, ask your parent, ask somebody that you believe will listen to you and do what you ask them to subscribe. That's all they have to do. Nothing else. Just subscribe. Michigan voters angry at Biden. That's not what the polling shows, does it? The polls show that Biden's narrowed the gap in Michigan since mid to late October. Doesn't sound like they're so angry. Not like they're happy. Get that. Not necessarily angry either.
In his support for Joe Biden, and saying that anyone who would criticize the man, and by criticize, I mean just like literally describe his policies or his current condition as evidenced by what all of us can see and hear with our own eyes and ears.
And I'm going to stop there for a second. I'll play a little more, and then I want to play another video. But if you listen to Crystal Ball, boy, does she sound like she's not on the Joe Biden train, doesn't she? She's going after John Fetterman. How, mocking him. How dare we criticize or even raise the issue of Biden's age and how he, has those senior moments. How dare we remark on something that everyone can see with their own two eyes? She's mocking Fetterman for defending Biden here.
Anyone who would criticize him should just go ahead and fly the MAGA flag.
So there it is. If you don't, not 100% behind Joe Biden, if you have any criticisms of him, you're somehow a MAGA supporter. And that's fine. I mean, I agree with Crystal Ball. We should be allowed to, not only we should be allowed to, criticizing Joe Biden doesn't make you a Donald Trump supporter. Heck, voting for someone other than Joe Biden doesn't make you a Donald Trump supporter. Only voting for Donald Trump makes you a Donald Trump supporter. But Crystal Ball took a very different tact back in September. This is September 11, 2023. Here she is with her husband, who's got that blonde, dyed hair. That's kind of weird. Like, what is that about, by the way? I saw Joy Ann Reid. She does Morning Joy on MSNBC. She has like a sort of a short, not buzz cut, Dutch boy. Is that what they call it? Page boy, Dutch boy haircut? I'm not really sure. That's blonde. And I don't know whether she was imitating Kulinski or he was imitating her, but they sure look like they went to the same hairstylist. Here's Crystal Ball with Brianna Joy Gray. Also on Breaking Points, and Kyle Kulinski.
Not only would I say that protecting the Biden National Labor Relations Board isn't important enough for me to vote for Joe Biden, but it is important enough that I would actively encourage, but I'm not going to shame them for whatever they decide to do, but I would actively encourage people who are in a swing state to vote for Joe Biden, if for no other reason than to protect that board.
All right, so there she is. She supports. That was in September, so it's before. Give her the benefit of the doubt. I think there are plenty of reasons she shouldn't have said that in September. Plenty of arguments against endorsing Joe Biden for president in September of 23. And I know she would say, well, I was very, very clear. I'm going to support Marianne Williamson, which I think she said in the primaries. But in the end, we know it's going to be Joe Biden, so you should vote for. No, I don't think you commit. I don't think you give Joe Biden your support without getting concessions, meaningful concessions from him, especially if you're an influencer in the nature of a crystal ball. But she, for whatever reason, said no, that NLRB decision is enough for her. And this is consistent with what others have said, that Joe Biden is an ally of labor, and therefore he, without more, deserves your support and should get it over Trump because Trump is so bad. All right, I don't agree with that analysis, but I give the benefit of the doubt to those who, before October 7th and Israel's violent, murderous reprisals against Gaza and the Palestinians, I understand a little bit the argument, Trump is really, really bad, and Biden hasn't been as bad as we thought, especially on labor, although I would argue he has been plenty bad on labor. But okay, you make that argument. So therefore, I'm willing to say, yeah, we need to support Joe Biden. I don't agree with that, but I kind of understand it a little bit. I think since Gaza, since October 7 and Israel's violent, murderous, genocidal acts in reprisal, I don't think you can morally make a case to vote for Joe Biden at this point. I think he has actively made our nation complicit in the genocidal acts of Israel because we are supporting their military. We are providing them with the weapons of murder. And I don't believe we can morally support that. I don't know whether Crystal Ball has come to that same conclusion. She certainly sounds like she's critical of a lot of what Joe Biden's done. But to my way of, from what I've seen, and I've kept a pretty close eye and I've done a lot of Googling, she has never renounced her statement that she supports Joe Biden for president, for re-election, and she supports, she calls on people in swing states like Michigan to vote for Joe Biden. So I think that's just, another example of even YouTubers, even live streamers like myself, even what do we call this? Podcasters who are ostensibly on the left, have taken positions that are pretty good. In the end, not really having the courage of their convictions, not really able to say, no, the Democrats are awful too. Genocide is so evil. What Israel is doing is so evil. Even if you don't want to call it genocide, okay, don't call it that. Call it mass murder. Call it whatever you want. Whatever they're doing is so evil, you can't support Joe Biden. But that's not the message from many on the left. And it should be, but it isn't. And it isn't yet from Crystal Ball. This is from the American Prospect. Harold Meyerson is the editor there. He used to write for the Washington Post. He was my favorite columnist at the Washington Post. I guess he was a little bit too far to the left for, a little too pro-labor maybe for our friend Jeff Bezos, who of course has made extraordinary profit from on the backs of work, of labor, both in this country, who have lost their jobs as a direct result of all the offshoring and outsourcing that he has done. And of course, the people in the Far East and who labor mightily at low wages to make the cheap goods that, to make the cheap, relatively cheap products that we get at his website, Amazon.com. By the way, I buy from Amazon.com. I'm not going to pretend I don't. It's extremely convenient. I just wish they treated that their political view wasn't so harmful to the world. But I guess I could say, what option do I have? I mean, there's really nowhere else to go for a lot of the stuff I purchased. The message that you heard from Crystal Ball back in October or September rather, that she's going to support Biden because of the National Labor Relations Board, because of his appointees, because of the great decisions they've made, is one that I guess has filtered through the progressive media sphere. And Harold Meyerson, whom I just mentioned, had a column where he talks about why the working class is no longer reliably democratic, why, except for union members whose numbers are dwindling, and in large part because of Democratic policy, their numbers are dwindling, working people are tending to move towards Trump, including many working people of color. And Meyerson says this is a shame. He understands why it's happening. He laments it because Joe Biden is the first president in half a century who's actually working to better their lot. Now, I don't hate this statement, and I'll tell you why I don't hate it. I don't hate it because what Meyerson is saying that is completely true is that Barack Obama did not work to better the lot of working people. Those of you who say, well, Barack Obama, the first black president who really was black, and he was really a progressive. Things were so much better. He did so much to help people. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. That's why so many working people who did vote for him, maybe once, maybe twice, many of them actually swung to Trump. Because Barack Obama was not a working person's president. The other first black president, people call Bill Clinton the first black president, he most certainly was a very, very detrimental president when it came to the quality of life that working people no longer enjoy in this country, championing trade, free trade agreements, especially, particularly NAFTA. But throughout his 8 years in office, his policies hurt working people. He was the great incarcerator, which meant millions of working Americans were locked up and couldn't support their families, couldn't provide for them. Many working people during Clinton's term in office actually did extraordinarily cheap prison labor, which meant that this was under Clinton, which meant that they were competing with American workers and therefore were keeping wages low for working people. Bill Clinton was a terrible president for working Americans. So I don't hate Harold Meyerson for throwing Clinton and Obama under the bus. George W. Bush was a terrible president for working people, also promoted free trade deals. Ronald Reagan, a terrible president for working people. So I have no problem with Harold Meyerson throwing all of them under the bus. Where I have a problem is saying, well, Joe Biden, though, was good for working people or is good for working people. The first one who's better than a lot. I don't see it. I just don't see it. Yes, the NLRB, yes, in a few areas where there was an awful lot of pressure on Biden, he did some good things. But in the end, he's a neoliberal president. In the end, he's a president of capital. And in the end, he's a president of Wall Street. Blocks U.S. railroad strike. Said no to the unions. He has never renounced the idea of free trade. Yes, to a degree, he has not gotten rid of the Trump tariffs. So I give him that. That's a positive. But in the end, he has never said we've got to start build in America. And the way we build in America is we make it more expensive. We make it costly. We impose a significant penalty on businesses that try to offshore. He's never said that. He's never done that. So I don't see him as an ally of labor. Let's see if we can get this video here for you. This is from that story I just showed you, the headline from Reuters. So you think Joe Biden's on the side of labor? The reason when people are telling you have to support him because he's not as bad as Trump, the arguments just don't fly. They're arguments by neoliberals. They're arguments by elites. They're arguments by people whose lives are pretty good.
President Joe Biden signed legislation Friday to block a U.S. railroad strike that could have devastated the American economy.
The bill I'm about to sign ends a difficult rail dispute and helps our nation avoid what, without a doubt, would have been an economic catastrophe at a very bad time in the calendar.
The Senate voted Thursday to impose a tentative deal reached in September on a dozen unions representing 115,000 workers who could have gone on strike next week.
The yeas are 80, the nays are 15.
But the Senate failed to approve a measure that would have provided sick days to rail workers.
All right, so one of the major issues in the rail strike was sick leave, as rail workers had no guarantee sick leave. And I'm not saying that was a factor in the East Palestine crash, which, by the way, post-dated this strike, right? I mean, this was in 22, the East Palestine. This was December 22. The East Palestine was in, February of 23, so about a month or two later. But you're more likely to have crashes when you have sick people in the engineering, in the locomotive, or they still call it that. I don't know if they call it the locomotive, in the driving the train. You're going to have more crashes if you have sick people at the signal switches. You're going to have more crashes if you have people who haven't gotten a break, recovering from a flu, who are working the brakes if they have people who work brakes. Sometimes I think some of these trains have just one person. Now, these enormous freight trains may have only one or two people on them. Biden said, you don't get to strike. I'm blocking your strike, and you're not getting sick leave either. Sorry. Suck it. That was his message to labor. Is that a friend of labor? Is that an ally of labor?
8 of 12 unions had ratified the deal, but some labor leaders have criticized Biden for imposing a contract that 4 unions rejected over its lack of paid sick leave.
And look, I know this bill doesn't have paid sick leave that these rail workers and frankly every worker in America deserves. But that fight isn't over.
Railroads.
Well, I think it is. I'm not aware of anyone pushing for more sick leave for these rail workers. And by the way, it's an incredibly profitable industry.
Have slashed labor to boost profits in recent years.
Right, slash labor, so there are fewer and fewer jobs. This was an opportunity for those rail workers left to really flex their muscles, to say, no, we've had enough. We're shutting it down. And I understand it would have been unpopular, and maybe Biden would have taken a little heat, or the Democrat. I don't think they would have. I think it would have been very easy to put the blame on the railroad executives for their harsh retaliatory tactics against the rail workers, but Biden said no strike. And he overrode what four unions were saying. That's not a friend of labor.
And have fiercely opposed adding paid sick time that would require them to hire more staff. A strike could have cost the American economy as much as $2 billion a day, while stranding millions of rail passengers.
Only would have cost them to the extent that the execs refused to agree. Well, if they agreed to the terms, or if Biden could have put the pressure on them, you got to agree to this, it actually would have benefited the American economy. It would have meant more people working in the railroad industry, making decent wages, which they're then spending. But Biden said no. Biden said no strike. That's not a friend. That's not an ally of labor, no matter what crystal ball may say.
Unions had asked for 15 paid sick days under the tentative deal.
Doesn't sound like too much, does it? Does that sound like so much sick leave? 3 weeks a year? You get the flu, that could be right there. Doesn't seem like that much. And by the way, when they start with 15, that's a negotiable. That means they probably would have come down to 10, something like that. How many did they get?
The road settled on none, and just one personal day.
One personal day.
The Teamsters president criticized the Senate vote, saying rail carriers make record profits, but workers get 0 sick days.
All right, so that's the deal. That's the deal that the friend of labor, the first president in 50 years, according to Harold Meyerson, the first friend of labor, brokered. I don't see it. I don't see again, when you actually examine the record, you don't see it. And yet, he's going to win. He's going to win Michigan going away tonight. The uncommitted is going to mean nothing. The vote uncommitted. So it's all, to me, performative. Even the detractors, even Biden's detractors, kind of give him the positive in other areas, like you just heard Crystal talking about labor. Just like Harold Meyerson just talked about labor. They're controlled opposition. They're not giving you the whole story. They're actually getting rewarded to support the Democratic establishment, the Democratic elites. Another issue, it's not just labor, where the allies of Biden, where the allies of the Democratic elites are hanging their hat when they argue you need to support him. The other issue that's huge that I've seen, where there seems to be a concerted effort, where it seems to be there's a puppet master saying, let's talk about labor. Let's point out what a great labor president Joe Biden is, even though he isn't. And one other point before I get, because I meant to say this, I forgot. The issues that are most critical for working people in America, the two issues I believe that would make the greatest difference in their lives are Medicare for all and changing the terms that we trade with other countries under. So if we trade with countries that have low-wage labor, we shouldn't trade with them, or there should be very high tariffs. Very, very high tariffs that are used, the money collected, that are used to, pay for infrastructure, to pay for all sorts of necessary quality of life issues that involve working people. If we're going to allow trade from low-wage countries like even China's not the lowest, although it's low, but Bangladesh, Haiti. If we're going to have trade from those countries, then we need to have very high tariffs to protect American labor that compete against workers in those countries. That said, we do have an obligation to people in those low-wage countries. We should be helping them out. We should be all manner of different effort to improve the quality of life of the people who live in those countries. But we shouldn't do it on the backs of our working people, which is what we do when we allow trade with countries where the average salary is under $1 an hour. And it doesn't really lead to much better quality of life for the people who live in Haiti or Bangladesh. Their quality of life or East, or Pakistan Is Bangladesh still a country? I never hear that name anymore. I don't know if it still is. I think it is. It doesn't really, they're still living subsistence lives at those very low. Yeah. They're still living subsistence lives. So we need to make things better for them, but we shouldn't be allowing them to live just barely to survive at the cost of our working people in this country. We can help both, and we should. So that's one area where there seems to be a consistent effort to try to persuade voters that Biden's a pro-worker president. The other area is women's rights and reproductive rights. And of course, we lost abortion rights because of the Trump justices. And I don't put that all on Trump. I mean, obviously, I would say the two worst justices are Alito and Thomas. I think they're both, well, I guess George H.W. Bush nominated Thomas and George W. Bush nominated Alito. So I think they're the two worst. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh ain't great. Coney Barrett's really bad. And Roberts is a problem, and he's another W nominee, appointee. So it's true. This is a really serious problem. And it's a hot button issue. And it's another area where elites are trying to get you to vote for somebody who's been a bad president, who's done a lot of harm. Most particularly in Gaza, Israel, but also in Ukraine, and also certainly, with respect to the climate catastrophe, if not in other areas as well. Here's what the folks in Michigan say about voting for Biden when it comes to Palestine. I want to play this, and then I want to play the response that Crystal Ball has with Emma Vigeland on the Majority, quote, the Majority Report, that's the Sam Cedar program, and how they're trying to finesse what I guess is ultimately their support for Joe Biden without, ignoring, without pretending that what he's doing in supporting Israel is just fundamentally wrong. They can't quite do that. This is a woke issue too. Palestine is a woke issue too. They can't really go against the Muslim American, Arab American, Palestinian American voters who are making great points about how bad Biden is when it comes to genocidal acts by Israel. But in the end, they also are controlled opposition, which means they'll only go so far when criticizing Joe Biden. Here's more on Palestinian voters or Palestinian American voters in Michigan.
Let's take a listen.
Is there a pathway forward for you with Biden?
Oh, absolutely not. You cannot keep killing people with our money and just keep thinking that, oh, we are stupid enough to elect you again, because we'll fall in line. We'll forget. This is an insult to me as a voter.
For you, Biden has a pathway forward.
Biden has a pathway forward. And
what does that look like?
That is him calling for a permanent and immediate ceasefire. The straightforward, simple answer for the Biden administration is push for a ceasefire, stop aiding Israel in their war crimes, and I guarantee you there are enough people who would be willing to deal with it and vote for the man. It is, in so many words, insane to me to have the Democratic Party and the Biden administration sit here and essentially say, if Trump happens, it's your fault.
If you don't want a Trump.
All right, so I'll stop it there. Powerful words. I was totally on board what both of them said. The woman who said, no, I can't support Biden, it's too much. What he's done is so bad in terms of providing Israel with the weapons of mass killing of my people. I can't support him. And I also got what the man said, which was, well, if he called for an immediate ceasefire, if he took steps to stop the killing right now, then maybe I would go back to him. I get both positions, and I'm kind of more where the woman is, like, no, I'm not going to support him. But I would say, and what I've said before, if Biden sent the U.S., if he deployed the U.S. military, if he gave, and I understand that a ceasefire looks like it may happen, and they're talking about that in the news, and that's good, and it's so late, and it's so short, and that's why, There are so many dead who shouldn't be dead right now. There's so many buildings that have been leveled that shouldn't have been leveled. There are hospitals that have been destroyed, all because the U.S. refused to hold Israel accountable, because Joe Biden refused to tell Netanyahu no, because Joe Biden refused to use the U.S. military to save lives. So it'd be very, very hard for me at this point to say to vote for him. But yeah, if he was willing to deploy the U.S. military now to protect Gazans, that would be pretty good. It'd be pretty strong. Those voices are very, very powerful. And, politically, it's hard for those on the left to kind of ignore them, to pretend, it doesn't matter what they said, or what they said is important. But, Biden's choices for the National Labor Relations Board are so big, so momentous, so important that we can overlook a little bit of genocide in return for, the right to bargain collectively. And I'm not saying the right to bargain collectively isn't important. I just don't know if it's enough to overlook genocide. But there's definitely a collective or concerted effort. I wonder if there's someone's pulling the strings, someone like a David Brock, the hitman who started Media Matters, or someone of that, or a Carville, or some sleazeball like that. There's a guy who goes on CNN a lot. I can't remember his name now. Democratic Party strategist. One of them has put together a concerted effort to tell, especially women, you have to support Joe Biden because of reproductive rights. And it's, again, a powerful argument. I mean, the right to choose is super important. Is it enough? Is it enough for you to overlook all the horrors that we have seen? I mean, it isn't for me. I mean, and that's, again, you could say, well, Hal, you're not a woman and your wife isn't going to get pregnant and you're privileged and this and that. So you can make all those arguments. I get them. I'm not going to dismiss them. I'm going to say, okay, you make your point. I get it. There is something to be said, quite a lot to be said for reproductive rights. At this point, there are too many strikes, there's too many X's on the debit side of the Biden ledger, led off by this ongoing genocide that he will not stop. So I can't support him. I wonder whether there's a concerted effort by people who are also extremely privileged, who also don't have to worry about their, ability to access reproductive justice for themselves. If there's some concerted effort by them to use this issue, I wonder. I just really wonder. Let's see. Here's what Emma Vigeland and Crystal Ball. I think this will work. Let's hope. There we go. Oh, no, it won't. It says formatting. So let me change it. I will get you we had some tech issues today. I do apologize. We'll get the video on in a different manner. I did have a belt and suspenders approach because I really wanted to get this video up for you. So here we go. Let's transition. And this is from the Revolutionary Black Network. Even though they're playing, that's why you sort of see the RBN, but let's get the video going. And they're playing from the Majority Report. So we'll get it on.
But it's also about not ignoring that being an issue for Democrats electorally. I mean, it's going to be a massive thing to overcome. And if he wins in the fall, it's basically going to be on the backs of pro-choice abortion activists, of that kind of activating so many voters, particularly suburban women, which I think Trump and Biden are battling over. And it will be in spite of all of these major red flags that would normally, I think, turn off voters in any other circumstance.
All right, so I'll stop it there. So what Emma Vigeland is doing there is she's setting the table for an argument down the road. Hey, it's pro-choice women, it's suburban women, it's privileged women, just like me, who got you reelected, Joe Biden, so now you owe us. And you can hear she's not saying it's not enough. You can hear that Emma Vigeland, because Emma Vigeland and Sam Zeder are big believers, if it's blue, it will do. You got to vote for Joe Biden. They have been critical. Cedar's one of my least favorite hosts, period, out there. I do not like his show in any way. I give him, in almost any way, I give him a little bit of credit because he has criticized Biden for his failure to protect Gazans, for, in fact, just doing just the opposite, killing Gazans, supporting the killing of Gazans. But they have not come out and said, but they also spend an awful lot of time telling us how awful Trump is, how dangerous Trump is, how Trump is the Antichrist. And so what Emma Vigeland is doing there is she's saying, well, look, Biden's really screwing up, but you know what? We pro-choice women can still bail him out. And is there pushback? Does Crystal Ball say, yeah, but we shouldn't? Yeah, it's not enough. Being able to, have an abortion, which I can still have. I mean, Crystal Ball, I think she lives where she lives in Virginia. I think it's not illegal in Virginia. And certainly she had to have no trouble getting to Maryland, where it's totally legal to get an abortion. Emma Vigeland, I believe she lives in New York City. No trouble for them to get abortions. They could say, hey, you know what? We're very lucky. We have choice. It's important that the whole country have it. We're going to vote against Trump for that reason. But it would also be, and I think more honorable, to say, you know what? It's just too awful. The things that Joe Biden has done are too awful. And he hasn't even fought for reproductive rights. He really hasn't. He has not been a champion of reproductive rights. So for all those reasons, remember, he shepherded Clarence Thomas through the Supreme Court. He got Clarence Thomas on the court, for crying out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's insanity what the Democrats are going with here. I don't know. Did you see that Axios report this morning about donors?
Yes.
They're saying that he goes to these,
fundraisers. So let me just stop it. You can see, by the way, at the bottom of that crawl, it says Crystal Ball or Ball because it turns on Joe Biden. I don't think she does. I never heard her turn on him. She says it's insane what they're going with. She talks about the donors. We'll get to that. It's quite a story in a moment. But she never says you can't vote for this guy. She never says, hey, I know I said back in September to vote for Joe Biden, but now I don't say that anymore. She doesn't do that.
Events. And even there, he'll take 2 or 3 pre-scripted questions that he has note cards so that he can respond to. I mean, what the hell are we doing here? And then you've got, people like John Fetterman who'll go on Morning Joe or wherever and tell you that if you dare even say anything about that and acknowledge the reality that 86% of Americans see in front of their eyeballs, that you may as well put your MAGA hat on. And, it makes you feel crazy. I wonder your view, Emmett. I know there's been a lot of hopes raised recently because of Ezra Klein and Nate Silver coming out and saying he needs to step aside, that maybe somebody will be able to get to him and pressure him to step aside.
It's not happening.
See, I agree with that too. I've lost any hope that that's on the table.
All right, so I'll stop it there. But you heard the points. And this was news to me. This kind of was consistent with what we were talking about yesterday with Arlen, where Crystal Ball said, hey, he can't even go to fundraisers with people he's got in his pocket, multi-million and billion-dollar billionaire Democratic donors who love Joe Biden because he's helped them get so rich, whether it was by, the student loan, privatization, which he supported, or all the sweetheart laws he helped pass. He shepherded through Congress to support the credit card industry, which is largely based in his home state of Delaware. The support for military adventures around the world, which has made billions for the weapons manufacturers. Joe Biden has a lot of friends in corporate America, in the MIC, in the military industrial complex. He's got those people very, very much on his side. They are not going to go after him, especially at high dollar event, high roller fundraisers. Even there, he needs, even with the most friendly, supportive people, he takes a couple of scripted questions in advance that he prepares an answer to. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's what Axios says. Maybe they're telling us that to lower expectations to such a great degree that when Biden's able to deliver a halfway decent speech, we're like, oh, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with. Maybe that's what this is all about, is lowering Joe Biden expectations. I don't know. It doesn't sound good. And it is consistent with what Arlen and I discussed yesterday, Joe Biden turning down a great opportunity to speak to the American public under very unchallenging circumstances at the Super Bowl. So Biden, very problematic Democratic candidate. Progressive groups like Our Revolution, progressive hosts like Crystal Ball are saying it's really bad what he's doing. He needs to change course. He needs to be more critical of Israel. We're even saying vote uncommitted in the Michigan primary, but what they will not say, what they will not do is say, no, you can't vote for this guy in the general election. We need to go in a different direction. And what you are also seeing is a concerted effort on the left to come up with some argument that Joe Biden is deserving of your support, whether it's overrating, overstating, exaggerating his pro-labor cred, or bringing up reproductive rights, even though he's in part responsible for the fact that you've lost them in much of this country. The reproductive rights issue is very, very interesting. I talked about Ali Mistal, who's a columnist at The Nation and a pundit, seems to get a lot of does a lot of tweeting or Xing. Is that what is the verb to tweet now the verb to X because of the way we've renamed Twitter X? I guess it is. Elie Mystal here having his cake and eating it too. He's acknowledging how bad Biden's policy is vis-a-vis Gaza, Israel. And by the way, if it looks a little bit blurred here, this is not taken from Elie Mystal's Twitter feed or X feed. This was actually screen captured from our friends at Revolutionary Blackout Network. Elie Mystal deleted this tweet. This tweet is dateline Feb 21. So, a week ago, 6 days ago. Elie Mystal deleted this tweet because he got so much blowback, so much pushback, so much harsh response for it. And what you can see is Mystal responding to Mayriad. Mayriad says to U.S. Palestinians, Biden's doing nothing. And that was in response to something that Elie Mystal had posted. So in other words, Mayriad is saying don't vote for Biden, period. And Elie Mystal, who recently had a column about how we need to support Biden and how bad Trump is and reproductive rights and what about Kamala? She's great. If you say that Biden's too old, you're really saying that you don't like Kamala Harris because she's black and she's incompetent because she's black, or a woman, or both. It's a load of crap, right? But Elie Mystal has clearly tied himself to the Biden train, even though he writes for what was once a truly progressive newspaper magazine, The Nation. And even Mystal can't go so far as to say, yes, Palestinians should vote for Joe Biden because Joe Biden's complicit in the genocidal acts by Israel. So instead, Mystal says, well, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to tell a Palestinian they have to vote for Joe Biden because they're suffering so much as a result of Joe Biden's actions. I can't do it. But I'm going to say white voters who don't care about Palestine, yeah, you go ahead and vote. You should vote for Joe Biden because of reproductive rights. And you don't even care about Gaza, so don't pretend you do. Well, that's absurd. That's just the stupidest point ever. If you don't believe in genocide, if you are holding Joe Biden responsible, at least in large part, for the genocidal acts of Israel, as well you should, then don't vote for Joe Biden, period. Then do vote uncommitted. Then then show your displeasure. I mean, that seems so clear, right? But Mystal's attitude is, well, a lot of you don't really care about Palestine anyway. So for those of you who don't care about Palestine, you should vote. You should vote for Joe Biden. And of course, that got totally shut down to the point where Mystal actually had to delete that tweet and I wish he hadn't. I don't think people should delete tweets in that way, but I get it. So do dissidents right? So if you're Palestinian, don't vote for the president who's murdering your people. But if you're white, shut up and vote for the president who's murdering Palestinians. This is the logic of a liberal class, and I don't think that's arguable. That's exactly what Elie Mystal is saying, and that Mystal changed his tune a little bit, recognizing, how badly that went over, which is basically only if you're a member of the organization or the group of people that's being targeted, you're the only ones who get to vote against the president who's responsible for your people being massacred. That didn't go over well. So Mystal changes tune. Remember, the tweet that he deleted was posted on the 21st, the tweet that said you have to vote for the guy killing the Palestinians if you're not Palestinian, if you're white and you don't really care about Palestinians. That didn't go over well. That was a bust. That went over like a lead balloon. Mystal deletes it and then responds on the 22nd. He comes up with another argument, and this is, I wonder again if this is somehow a manufactured argument, kind of a top-down approach. Let's use reproductive rights. So Brianna Joy Gray says, or she responds to Elie Mystal. Okay, abortion. Okay, so when Elie Mystal says you don't vote. If you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're voting against reproductive rights. You're voting to take away abortion from poor women, from women. And you have to vote for, therefore, you have to vote for Joe Biden. Because the argument you have to vote for Joe Biden if you're white and you don't care about Palestinians didn't work. So now Mystal says, okay, we have to vote for Biden because of the abortion issue. And so Brianna Joy Gray responds, sir, I'm the one with a functioning uterus, which I found kind of off-putting because what about, and I'm wondering, I don't know why she said it that way. Is it her point that, well, I haven't gone through, I'm not postmenopausal? I really don't know. To me, it's not only women who can have children for whom this is an important issue, just like it's not only an issue for Palestinians that Palestinians are getting killed by Israel and by the United States. So I don't love that Brianna Joy Gray wrote that, but whatever. Sir, but I like what she said, the rest. Sir, I'm the one with a functioning uterus. Solidarity means we stand together to ensure all our rights are protected. Throwing vulnerable groups under the bus, meaning like Palestinians, to protect my own rights is exactly how you get fascism. That is exactly correct, 100%. Yes, that's what fascists do. They pit out groups. They pit working people against each other. They divide us by race, by gender, by sexual preference. And that's how they win. And that's exactly what Elie Mystal is doing when he says, hey, if you're not Palestinian, you got to vote for Biden. If you care about women's rights, you got to vote for Biden. And Brianna Joy Gray says, wait a second, I'm the one who this really matters, not you, when it comes to reproductive rights. And you're wrong. We cannot ignore the plight of the Palestinian people. And Elie Mystal's response, okay, glib, ignore completely what Brianna Joy Gray says. Okay, abortion bans for everybody, I guess. And he continues, by the way, sorry, a little bit of darkness there. I too would like purity, but I'm not going to defend, and I'm not going to even defend Biden. But when the Christo-fascists take over and give embryos more rights than people, I want to be able to say that I did what I could to stop them. So incredibly sanctimonious, incredibly self-righteous, and I fear effective with many of you. If we want to change, we have to be willing to vote for a change, or we have to be willing to not vote for a change. And voting for Biden is voting for more of the same. And I just don't think we can afford it. I don't think we can afford it when it comes to, I don't think working people can afford it. People who lost their right to strike, people who don't have health care, and people who are getting bombed or whose family members are getting bombed. I don't think any of us can afford it. I think at this point, we have got, and I ask, people in Michigan and around this country, we cannot vote for either blue or red. I'll be back tomorrow. Hope you'll join me, 240-242-5646. I'm really glad I was able to do this live stream. I hope it worked out. I feel like it did, but you're the one who decides that in the end. Have a great rest of your day.